Welcome. I'm J. Michael Silver, and this is Foundational Steps, the show where I talk with people about the choices they've made to get where they are in life now. In this episode, I'm talking with Ben Whitehair. Entrepreneur, social media expert, actor are just a few titles that fit Ben. He has been around the block, as they say, and we dive in and talk about what choices have made him who he is today. It's a great conversation you won't want to miss. Links to Ben and timestamps for everything that came up are in the show notes. Please support the show by leaving a comment or review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to check out our affiliate links. You might find something of value. Awesome. Ben, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, this is cool. So after our long-winded opening conversation without hitting record, let's just jump into I don't know how you're going to react to this actually. So this could be the deepest question in the universe, or it could be a completely benign, easy question. What moment did you realize you were in your body and the choices you were making actually affected the reality around you? And that could be at 4 years old when your mom said you can't have ice cream, and you're like, no, I want ice cream, and I'm going to do whatever the heck it takes to get that. Or, when you were 30 on set or some other situation scenario. No right or wrong.
I do not have a high level of recall and detail for past experiences, generally speaking. And I would say even less so for like my younger child, like the farther away I get from a period in time, my brain just doesn't catalog things from like a recall standpoint. So I hear people talking about like, I remember being 2 years old or this thing or that. And like, I don't really have those. I like have a concept of me having those. I'm like, yeah, I probably thought something like that when I'll see a picture of me as a kid.
Sure.
I will say that, I don't know if this totally answers your question, but I think over time, as a kid, my parents both had a strong value around agency and giving us kids agency and treating us as independent beings. And so I think I actually, like, I don't, there are a couple specific moments that like click for me in my life, but that are not quite that I'm like, wow, that was a big moment, or even just slightly looking back, so holy crap, that changed my life.
That's an interesting point of reference though. A distinction between being conscious in the choices you make, or being aware that you were playing this game we call life, doesn't necessarily have to be a big moment, and doesn't necessarily have to have any impact on the rest of your life as you see it. But I would, because, in the email, so I asked you some questions, and that's pretty specific, the answers you got back. And anything, from your life story, I don't want to be the one that brings it up. So if it comes up organically, then great.
Well, you're welcome to. I've written about basically all of it. So you will not offend me.
No.
But I like what you're saying. This path of it not having to be like a defining moment, I think is really interesting.
And it's an important distinction, I think, because most people think of consciousness or being like, a moment of clarity as being a moment where everything came into focus and I knew my life's purpose, or an awakening. But in truth, I think, and this is just my personal take on life or existence, our job is to become more and more conscious and aware of anything and everything, and allow ourselves to be an observer and an active participant all at the same time, which is oftentimes, kind of a reference to flow state or out of body experience and flow state. So people, like, I've been on stage before and I'm so in it, I almost feel like I'm sitting in the audience with the audience, like, this is pretty good, right?
And I'm on stage. and I've had the flip too. I'm in the audience like, this is not working, is it? This is no, not. I've done that too. We're totally bombing, huh? Yeah, I thought so too. That joke, I did not pull that off.
But there's an element of consciousness, awareness, flow that needs to take place for everything to be working so that you can have a both an associated and dissociated perspective at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I think that's the goal, is to reach those places. So that moment of clarity, that awakening, or those inspired moments while you're performing, where you're both in the audience and on stage at the same time, that is, I think, the ultimate attainment that we spend our lives learning how to cultivate and get better and better at. So my question, though, specifically is, at what point do you first remember or recall just being dropped into your body? Like when you first looked around and had agency. I love the word agency, by the way. I don't use it often, but when I do, I'm in love with it. It's like, oh, this is the perfect time to use agency.
Great. I'm very much a word nerd. Finding those like perfect words.
Yeah, it's fantastic word.
It's interesting because there are times in my childhood I'm looking back and thinking about, like, was I experiencing that in the moment, or am I now putting that on myself as the kid? And similarly to your point earlier about some of these defining moments not necessarily being this giant aha as it's happening, I'm thinking back to like how much of it is me after the fact, either realizing that happened or maybe in some cases putting it onto myself at that time. But, you know, when I was the first real house I remember growing up in, I remember how I like the some of the core memories I have, some of which being like things that happened on holidays or like being put in timeout or things that were like more meaningful, but also just the like, I actually do have the memory of like just walking into my family room and seeing the light and like, oh yeah, this is however philosophical we want to get, but feeling like, yes, like I'm alive and existing in this world and distinct from other people and these things. There is some level of distinction, separate or not, but some level of distinction between me and these other people and the space I'm in. I played a decent amount of sports growing up, and I feel like I remember getting a concussion one time in soccer. That definitely, oh wow, I have a body. Things impact my body. My body can do things like
this is a real moment. Yeah, I mean, I think probably just to give you an idea, my very, very first memory and being, and this kind of goes into choices and goes into a level of consciousness and awareness. I was in the house that I was born in, or taken home to after my birth, I guess is a more accurate way of saying it. And I left that house when I was like 3 or just over 3. So this had to have been, you know, maximum, you know, the summer I turned 3, or within a few months of turning 3, or when I was still in my 2-year age place. And I'm standing looking at the 2 steps that take from like the main house into the hallway that goes back to the bedrooms. And I'm looking at the 2 steps and I'm looking at the end of the hallway and I'm kind of moving towards it. Like, and I have this awareness, and the memory is so simple that there's not much for me to put on it. I just have this memory of those 2 steps and where they go, and being able to move towards them and having the awareness or the, you know, the consciousness, you know, that I can go there and that's a place and it's different than this place that I'm standing. Like that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
And that moment resonates stronger than most of the memories around the first, let's say, 5 years of my life. And because it resonates slightly stronger, I would key that as the first conscious memory I have of being in this body and being able to make choices. And then there's other things, obviously, but that's the earliest moment that I can point to and saying something's going on there. I don't know what, and I don't know why. And it was so young.
Yeah.
Where my old roommate, who I talked to in an earlier episode, Scott said that his first real moment, and he was a college athlete, very engaged young person from all that I knew about him prior to when we met. And he said his first real moment is standing on the roof of our first apartment building when we moved out to LA. And my father said, "So you guys really doing this, huh?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I guess we are."
I guess
And it
we
was like the
are.
first moment that it just hit him that this is all real and it's happening, and his choices matter. So, and he was 24 at the time, or 23 at the time, or something like that.
Interesting.
So everyone's different in how they look at this. And then of course we can go back in time or forward in time based on, how you remember things or what you remember. So like one of the things that I started thinking about as you were trying to think about this is in the last, let's say, let's keep just a 5-year period of time. In the last 5 years window, what's one moment that stood out to you where you really like took a deep breath, or you did something where you just really kind of felt like, whether you were standing, sitting, laying down, where you just really felt in your body engaged on a cellular level, because I kind of know where you're at nowadays. So most likely it would be a much more profound experience in the recent past where you're like, I know what I'm going to do, or I don't know what I'm going to do, or, oh, fuck, what should I do? Like in the last 5 years, there's probably at least one moment.
There is.
So what was that?
I was sitting in an acting workshop with a casting director. And as you know, I have been in LA about 13 years now. And like the number one priority that I had put in my life since moving to LA was acting career. Like that was my North Star.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in this acting workshop, and I think I'd done my scene and I got, great feedback and whatever. But I was sitting in this desk, and something happened to me that I never thought would happen to me, where I was just sitting there and I felt like my entire world just like shifted. And for truly the first time, I felt like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And I had never felt even anything close to that. And I'd heard other actors describe it, but I just had never, I'm like, yeah, man, that sounds really challenging. I've never felt that before. I haven't had that question. And nothing happened. I was just sitting there. There was nothing like, there's no particular trigger. Nobody said something that like had me question. I was just sitting there and I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And then the thought that followed was, if my life looks the same as it does right now, 10 years from now, I don't think I'll be happy with myself.
Mm.
And pretty immediately, I started that exploration and very immediately took next steps to like shift the way my life looked. And it almost took acting. It essentially unseated acting as my North Star.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a mind fuck, if I can swear with you. It was like, it really messed with my head because it was so different and I hadn't been in that space at all. And I'm very grateful for that. And one of the, ironies of life, the more that I let go of that over time, the more that it's come back. Mm-hmm. And I was clear that I was clear that I loved to act. I hadn't lost my love for that. And I had heard other people say like, oh, I just don't love it the same way anymore. And I was like, oh, I still do. Like actually being on camera with other people in a classroom.
I wish I didn't sometimes, but
yeah, exactly. But I was like, no, that's not what changed. But the other pieces all around like totally shifted. And it was a very, like, and I was aware of it in the moment because other things in my life, I look back and I was like, in that moment, it didn't necessarily. So like when I moved out of my mom's house, my parents were divorced. They got divorced when I was about 11, was living with my mom, decided to move back in with my dad when I was just almost 16. One of the most life-defining moments looking back. Like if you're writing a script, you'd be like, yep, that's some huge life-defining moment. At the time, it just felt like what I needed to do, both in self-preservation for the life that I want for myriad reasons. It didn't feel like, oh my God, I'm making this profound decision.
Right.
And when I fill out that story and tell people what was going on in my life and the abuse that was happening and the challenges and this and the family, like, oh my God, that must've been so hard. And interestingly, at the time, it didn't actually feel hard. I was like, well, this is what I have to do. I'm going to make this choice now. Looking back, completely altered the course of my whole life.
See, and that's one of the most interesting things I find with people. It's like falling in love. You know that you love this person. There's no anxiety. There's no games. There's no, can I be honest with this person, or can I fart in front of them, or anything? It's just, whatever you do is going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's still going to be okay because you'll figure it out and it's going to be okay. So it doesn't, like, nothing matters. And it's easy. And the life moments, like I said, I think our purpose, or the purpose, I don't believe in meaning in life. It's what you give it. There's no meaning. It's only what you give it. And that's the beauty of our existence. It's idempotent. We live, we die. That's our only guarantees. Anything in between, just like going from LA to New York on a plane, we get to jump up and down, we get to run around, we get to drink, not drink, fall in love, not fall in love, read a book, do some work, write a memoir, whatever. It's our choice. We're still going to end up, in New York if we're leaving LA to New York, or whatever. So, but the difference between, I think, being really truly conscious and in control, whatever that means, control, that's a whole nother thing that we'd probably spend hours talking about. But just for the ease, if you're in control of your life, then you are conscious of your decisions, why you're making them. And even if it's an easy choice to make, you understand it so that you can do it again and again and again and again and keep it being easy. So the older we get, I found, is where people start having problems, because it's easy to know, no, I don't want to do this. Well, why don't you want to? I don't know. I just don't want to do this. I mean, that's every kid ever, right? Like, well, why? I don't know. Anyway, you get the point. Everyone gets the point. So, but understanding what that mechanism is, I think, what makes our lives richer as we get older. And the sooner we can have, and this is again just my opinion, the sooner we can have that understanding, the more richness we can have in our life sooner. So that's my supposition. So, and now again, we talked about this a little bit in our pre-chat. Every moment in your life can be reviewed with a level of love, acceptance, gratitude, graciousness, to get the richness, even though you may not have had it when you were younger.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, what you're talking about, these moments in time that you remember, but you don't know what you're putting onto it or not.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm wondering if, right now, given the conversation we've just had and pre-chat and whatever else, if you can go back and say, can you think of this now, and think of a moment in your childhood where you can say, it didn't really matter what you're putting onto it because it was rich, because this is what I got out of it. I just didn't have the words for it. Does that make more sense?
Sure. Well, and that ability to I rewrite our memories, or perhaps paint and color the experience, I think is one of the reasons why my default level of happiness is pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think for some combination of my upbringing and training and education, and throughout my life, over time realizing like, oh yeah, I can revisit things that even at the time I interpreted as absolutely horrible, and I can change how I interpret that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the facts, if you will, of just like, okay, this actual thing happened. This fence was white and now it's blue. Like, that's a fact. But I can interpret that in all kinds of ways. And so, like, looking back on my childhood, I mean, I think I felt overall, like I said, I think I had a general sense of like, oh yeah, I have agency, I have choices. But I think the first like big shift where it felt, I don't know that I love this description, but where it felt adult, was when I chose to move out of my mom's house, because I was very much going against the overall construction of everything that was around me.
Right.
Like, no one had suggested it. There was a lot of pressure not to do that in a lot of ways. And so choosing to do that, and then like going like, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I just decided.
And that's it. I think that's everything. I mean, I think that's everything in my estimation of life, because when you can pinpoint the first time you did it, then I think every other time becomes easier after that. And, to some extent, you're a person that's done a lot of inner work, shadow work, personal work. So perhaps it's easier for you. I don't know. Easier is also relative.
Sure.
But, the fascinating thing to me is, what that was like. And now that we've kind of defined it or redefined it within this context, because I'm sure you've thought about it a million times, and you've defined it and redefined it. So now that we've redefined it in a way that, we are able to speak easier about it, that moment in time, that conscious experience, every time after that, do you see the similarities? Are there any times where it became different in other choices where you were making like, a concerted effort to do something maybe that wasn't, maybe it was perfectly in line with your professors, educators, people who you respect, mentors, or maybe it was completely different. But do you see that choice mechanism being the same? And if it's not the same, how was it different?
I think for me, I see a lot of similarities, but what comes up for me is that I have gotten to relearn and remind myself over time. And that, I'm thinking now, so when I was in college, all signs pointed to me going to grad school and, like, I don't know, being a lawyer, or I don't know, some sort of, I was a very good student.
Mm-hmm.
And both my parents had graduate degrees, and like, the standard path for anybody in my situation, be like, well, yeah, go to grad school or get into these, whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember like, I didn't want to do that. Like you said, the kid, like, I don't know. I just don't want to. I'm like, I don't want to. Like, I don't see a vision for my life that is me being a lawyer, or like I was a biology major for a while. I'm like, I don't see myself in a lab. I definitely don't want to be a doctor. Like there was I at that point had no vision for like what my life would be based on the path that I felt like people were telling me to go down.
Yeah.
Were they or were they not? I don't know. Right. And so I remember it was like a profound moment. Must have been my sophomore year of college. I remember where I was talking to my buddy Kelso and having this realization, like, wait a second, I don't have to go to grad school.
Yeah.
And I remember that was one of those moments where in the moment it felt like, oh my God, like this is like a profound revelation. Yeah. And everybody's like, I mean, yeah, of course you don't. Like, what's the matter with you? Like, duh. But I was like, oh my God. And it was like it was similar. And it was that, oh, wait a second. I do have agency. I can choose where I'm living, what I'm studying, the profession I'm in, the person I'm dating, the whatever. Like I have that choice. So I do think it's very similar. And I certainly find the more that I practice that, as with anything, the practice of it makes it easier. Though I will say that I think there's a trap in that, at least in my experience sometimes, because I have now practiced it so much, had wonderful benefits and richness in life from doing that I sometimes take it for granted. And it's easy for me to get, like, I think probably anyone, stuck into routine, habit, maybe bordering on complacency. And especially when things are working, like, oh, my life is working. So it's easy to just keep doing what I'm doing, because like, there's nothing like screaming at me like, hey, this clearly isn't working. Your health is in complete decay, or your bank account's completely empty, or no one around you cares about you. Like those things, when I've had that, and it's like, okay, clearly I get to change something. And when there aren't those loud noises, I have found it even easier for myself to get into that same routine and need to practice like waking myself up out of it and go, wait a second, I have choice. I get to make sure that maybe I want to keep choosing this, but maybe I don't.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, I think, and I'm curious to know if this has been part of your journey with your significant other, but when you are doing it with someone, it's easier to make that conscious choice every single day because you have instantaneously feedback. if you get complacent and they're not on the same page, you know it immediately because or maybe they're just not in the same place. And so you're like, wait, I don't get to just get my coffee this morning or whatever the morning routine is, like, because you've got something you need to deal with and I need to be there for you. Like, what's going on? Like, it kind of throws you out of your game. So you get, I think, to be more conscious when you have a significant other in your life, or a dog that's saying, no, I need to pee right now. We're going outside. You don't get to be lazy this morning.
Well, and I'm not a parent yet, but I hear parents describe like, oh my gosh, yeah, now that I have a kid, doesn't matter that I wanted my morning coffee right now. That's not what the kid wanted. And my plans have now changed.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know that it's inherent in a partnership that happens. But I think, at least for me, when my partnership is at its best, and the kind of partner who I'm with now does bring that, like, I don't know that just being in partnership, I guess what I'm saying is we could be unconscious of that and still fall into the trap and the routine. Yeah, exactly. That's the unhealthy version of it. But in the healthy version of it, like, yeah. And, my girlfriend and I are actively planning on having kids and starting a family and all of that. And it has, similar to kind of what we were talking about earlier, it has taken that from an idea and a concept, which I've always known I wanted kids. Like that was just a part, like, I want to have kids. That is a core part of my being, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, sure. Biologically, I'm sure is feeding plenty of that, but like a desire from a young age. Now that I'm in my 30s and moving beyond, it is taking it from like theory to, hey, like actually though, like the steps it takes to create the life that I want for my kids and the partnership that I want to be with that. And so it is calling me to a higher level of being conscious about the decisions I'm making. And the moment I described earlier was like, I don't know if I want to keep acting anymore. I think that was part of it, was that part of me that was like, hey, kids, family, these other things in life that deeply matter to you. Because even acting in and of itself is amazing. Like the flow state, like that is enough for me in many ways.
Yep.
And also, I think in a lot of ways it's a means to an end. Like it's not just the acting for me, it's the impact that storytelling can have and the impact that culture can have.
Massively
and
powerful.
All of that, like that's even above acting, as it were, in it for me. And so those parts of myself, those voices calling me into, hey, there's some real biological and practical implications that you get to be mindful of. So like, hey, you get to really start to be conscious of the choices you're making, if that's the life that you're committed to creating. And I'm very grateful. My partner is very effective at creating healthy relationship and that constant feedback. And sometimes it's challenging and crunchy and, we're bumping up against things, but yes, it is a very, I'm practicing it a lot recently as we're in these conversations.
Yeah. It's a super fascinating thing. And I don't think there's a way around it. When you're by yourself, live alone, or have a roommate that's not like tied to your life, it is very easy to get complacent and fall back to sleep, to just being comfortable or what have you. As soon as you have a living being in your life, even if it's just a dog that makes you do things that are outside of whatever you want to do, it changes the dynamics.
I will say, though, the flip side was also true for me. I had been in relationships or in relationship in some meaningful way for a long time without what I would call significant period of being single and living by myself. And that was an important part of my development, I think, as who I am, was, hey, I get to figure out who I am when I'm just by myself.
Yeah.
And I'm not defining myself based on a relationship or a roommate or other people or my career or who am I at 8 p.m. on a Friday when I live by myself?
Do you find that when you were on your own that it required even more effort to be conscious though? Or was it easier in those periods of time in your life? Because I have oftentimes told my friends in the past, just be single, just be alone, just enjoy, learn to love yourself, just love yourself, just
give it a shot. Yeah. Let me know what you think. Try
it
alone
love
just
yourself.
For a second.
It's okay.
See what you think.
And it's, I spent maybe too much time doing that. Because I didn't want to waste any time with someone that I knew it wasn't going to work out with long-term.
Sure.
Because it just felt like I was holding them back. It's like, we've been together a couple months. I know this isn't going to go where I want it to go. And I don't want you to get comfortable. So I'm like, let's just end it.
Sure.
Which maybe I prematurely ended several relationships and I could have learned more, but such is life. So, did you find in your singledom that it required more energy, more effort to grow, or was it easier for you?
I would say that it was easier, but not necessarily because I was single. I think I had done so much work on the foundations of my life, both in terms of like personal work, the habits I had, the way my businesses were going, such that like I was in a pretty good space. So when I was single, I had a lot of mechanisms built in that made it easier. And I also, when I was younger, I had the story that a relationship would take away from my individuality. And even
That's a powerful
less
story.
helpful than that. Yeah. Even less helpful than that was the story I had that being in relationship, that a partner would decrease the likelihood that I would achieve the career goals that I had. And I've always been very like, I would say, maybe career driven, although I think it's often been very like mission focused, like that purpose driven.
Yeah.
And I very much had the story that like, well, it's either my purpose or a relationship. And when those are both present, something's going to lose out. And the first woman I dated meaningfully in Los Angeles really like started the transformation of change for me around that. And
That's
it was
great.
like, well, what if the relationship is actually the key to you achieving those things? Like, would that be possible? And like, I have so much love for her and we're still close friends. I did not fully get to the other end of that journey. Like she started it and like, I'm like, thank you for starting that. And I'm sorry further along, because like you deserved me to be further along, but here we are. And
yeah, but then she couldn't be with who she's with, and you can be with who you're with.
And she's
so.
Exactly. And I think, and she would say the same thing. We're both very, very grateful for that. But looking back, it was a strong story I had that was like, this relationship is in conflict with my career. And that was something I was putting on it. And there are some practical realities of the number of hours we have in a day and how we choose to spend our time. But I will say that, now I definitely do not feel like, oh, my relationship is a hindrance to these other pieces. Yeah. And particularly with my girlfriend, Jessica, now I'm like seeing even new ways that I hadn't even conceived of, that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm actually, there are new possibilities that are opening up. There's more freedom. There are opportunities that I would not have if I were not in this partnership. And so as opposed to it being something that takes away opportunities and other pieces, it's like, oh my gosh, this is actually enriching it. And I've felt that before, but I'm very much experiencing it in a way that I haven't.
Like, I don't think that it can't be done on your own. I mean, there's definitely some successful single people, men and women, that have, I'm just going to give them the benefit of doubt and say they're incredibly happy, well-adjusted people. I think it's totally feasible, doable, practical. However, I don't think it's the norm. Otherwise, I don't think there would be so many cultural, historical, and current day ideas around partnering and coupling. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think it's far more normal to couple and have an easier life. I mean, so we talked about ideas that I wanted to amplify. So let me throw this on you and see how this resonates for you. So tribalism, in my estimation, is a survival mechanism. Mm-hmm. It in no way, shape, or form is natural to humanity, other than it's an extension of survivalism. The only thing we do as humans, or the only thing that is really natural to the human experience, is we are survivalists. We want to survive at all costs. And we were taught from at least the first 7 to 15 years of our life that we cannot survive without at least one other person in our life. Mm-hmm. We need at least one other person, typically our mother, but we need at least one other person, maybe a brother, maybe a father, maybe a sister. We need one other person to make this thing doable. And this first 7 years especially is indelible, because that's when we're in that, absorb mode. And we're in that, constant theta state brainwave where we're just basically in hypnosis the entire time. So if we think of survivalism, or survival as our only real mechanism for life, then tribalism is just an extension. It's like, well, let's get more people together to make our life easier. And by getting more people together, we can make this easier. But if we're in survival mode, then we're hungry, we're tired, we're looking around, we don't want to be eaten, we're protective. There's a level of fear of what the outside world is going on. And so now we've got a group of people in fear, protecting what's ours, saying, go away. We don't want any. We don't know if we like you or not. We have to protect this. And if you're going to jeopardize this, we're going to attack you. Whereas community is a group of people that are thriving. So family is a group of people that are thriving. So if you can get out of survival mode into thrive mode, which typically requires numerous other people, a number of other people, but to let go of your fear, let down your guard and say, what else can we grow? What else can we build? What else can we make? All of a sudden, the community can start to thrive. And as long as the community doesn't get turned into that fear heavy mode, then we don't go tribal. So tribal is a group in survival mode. Community is a group in thrive mode. You know, a scary person is a group as a individual in survival mode that is trying to survive. And so give me your money, or give me your food, give me your clothes, give me, you know, whatever. I need it because I need to survive. Fear versus love versus thrive versus growing. So, you know, I would say as a single person in today's world, we can fairly easily survive and even begin to thrive without too much need for other people. You know, we got our friends, we got our family, you know, there's some community, but we're able to let go of that survival thing or having to need someone, that incubation period, where then we can be in a healthy relationship, or we can get out of those old friendships. Like, I don't know that you really want my best. I want your best. I don't think you still want my best. So you go your own way. I'm going to go my own way. Good luck. So I'm curious now, you know, with your experience, you know, given your family history, given your single time, and now you're in a serious relationship, a healthy relationship, which is amazing and wonderful. How do you see survival versus thriving, you know, or abundance, and, you know, tribal, you know, which is, you know, defined as, let me protect us. This is a sacred group. You can't mess with us. We need to protect ourselves. And community, which is like, hey, come on in. We got plenty of soup for everyone.
Well, a couple things come up for me. One is the more I think I gained a lot from learning, again, relatively early on when I moved to my mom's house and so on and so forth. I had data to back up a belief that I would always be able to survive.
Yeah.
And so, and I think a lot of really great things come from that, including a level of self-assurance that if nothing else from my childhood trauma, I'm like, look, it's not as bad as that was. So like, I'm going to be fine. If I got through that, this business deal that's going wrong, or this thing, or this, whatever, like, I'm so blessed. Like, I'm going to be just fine. Right. So I think there's a lot of really great things that came from that. The shadow side of that was, I think, spending a lot of time feeling like I could only do it alone, or that I had to do it alone, or that there were some sort of weird kind of bonus points, gold stars that I would get if I did it alone, or if I struggled. Jonathan Prince, who, you know, I saw him speak actually in a thing that eventually led me to Howie's class, which is how I know you. That's how I heard about it, was through Jonathan. And the thing I heard him speak at, he said, you know, there's no extra credit for the struggle. There's no bonus points. There's no, you know, and I remember it's a really profound moment, and other people have said it, but I remember when he said it in that moment, I was like, holy crap. I have been living at least part of my life with the story that, you know, if I work really hard and I had challenges and whatever, that like, I don't know what I thought, right? That like on my tombstone, there's an asterisk that's like, by the way, he worked really hard to get here.
Yeah.
Like, but it was really profound, and letting go. You know, you mentioned easy being relative. And I find that like, in life, effort is required, but the struggle is optional. my relationship to that effort, whether I choose it to be easy or I choose it to be a struggle, like that's part of that perspective that I can put onto these things. And so the benefits that came from seeing like, okay, I can survive on my own. I can make this happen. Again, didn't feel like a profound choice, but like moved to LA and I had a roommate, but like, yeah, okay, I can do this. I can move across the country and I can find jobs and I can create money and whatever challenges, like I can do that. I think part of what I think makes my partnership so healthy is that both of us have that sense and her childhood as well, getting to a point of like, okay, we will be fine if we're alone. We will be able to survive. And from that space in partnership, I think there's an element of then being able to thrive. And I would say the same thing about many of the business partnerships that I have or have had over the years was like, yeah, individually, sure, we could both probably go start this business and be fine and whatever. But actually, if we're together or now in this community, it'll happen faster, more effective, less struggle. And in some way, like some of it's literally not possible alone. Like the business stuff I'm doing or any of that, like it could not, one person could not do it. It is not possible.
I mean, making a film, granted, there are some movies that you could do. Bo Burnham did a fantastic job putting his film together, his Netflix special.
Absolutely brilliant.
But I would argue that it still required other people to get that thing on Netflix.
To get it on Netflix, even to have the microphone he used, like required, like thousands of people were probably involved in the full supply chain of that microphone being in his apartment.
Exactly. And that's the interesting thing, that goes back to the one earth, same air and water. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. There is a wonderful podcast. I think it was Lex Friedman podcast, and I don't remember who the guy he had on off the top of my head, but I actually followed him on Twitter, which I don't do anything on Twitter. So I got to follow him. If I'm going to follow anyone on Twitter, I'm going to follow this dude. And it's like, how many people would it take? How many people, like if nuclear war went off or whatever, how many people would it take and how long would it take to produce a pencil? Because if you think about a pencil as a piece of wood with a lead stick on it, with a little metal wrapped around it and an eraser. I don't even know what the hell eraser is made of.
I'm sure some kind of rubber.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a petroleum product, or it could be from a rubber tree. I don't know. That would take how much experimentation to create an eraser, to mine the ore, to create the little tin metal wrapping. Processing the wood, getting the right heaviness of the wood so that it's stiff enough but not too stiff, getting the graphite or the lead, and pressing it and then getting it in perfect form inside the pencil. Like, and then the paint, like, where's the paint coming from? What plants are you growing to get the pigment, and how are you getting the pigment, and how are you processing the pigment? Like, it's an amazing amount of work to get a pencil, an amazing amount of resources and technology. And like, to me, that's, also the one earth, same air and water idea. Like, we're in this together, whether we like it or not. So we can either choose to be tribal or we can choose to be communal. Communal support each other, and tribal fight against each other. So like, that's kind of what it boils down to. And I feel like a healthy relationship, having that single life, having our privileged modern lives can be taught to a very young child, through example, so that they can see the healthy side of thriving as a single individual, the healthy side of thriving as a couple or as a community, group, bigger and bigger. Yeah,
I it's been very present to me as we watch what is happening in the world between Russia and Ukraine. And, I think globally we're battling out this, as you've defined it, this tribalism versus communalism.
We're trying to figure it out right now.
And it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast. My dad had sent me a conversation they were having, and I tend to be pretty far on the, progressive liberal end of a worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And not even just politically, but just the way, like the value sets I have around change, or, those other pieces.
You're
and one
an
of the points,
open-minded person.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the points that was made, which really stuck with me, was the trap on that side of the spectrum is that in my own example, but for anyone in that mindset, is that there is wisdom in the way things have been done, or wisdom in things. And what made me think of it earlier was you mentioning, hey, we have all these norms and cultural norms around coupling, and marriage, or all these other things. Do I think it is inherent to our biology? No, or we wouldn't need so many cultural norms to support it.
Yeah.
But so what is that dance then between the wisdom of what that is, and like there's a reason, as you said, like there's a reason that exists.
Yeah.
Does that mean you have to do it? No. Does that mean people can't be successful or happy and be single? Of course not. You absolutely could. But there's some large element of wisdom if it's, gone on for this long.
I mean, I really think it's as simple as thriving versus surviving, because it's far easier to survive when you're not on your own.
Yeah.
And not many people have the capacity to thrive alone. And then even fewer people have the capacity to thrive on their own and want to be alone, which is why, people who live off the land oftentimes are married with kids and are raising their kids that way as well. They learn how to do this, and they teach their kids, and they, they keep those practices alive. It's an interesting thing. I would love to see, I do think that, on an esoteric level, on a practical level, pragmatic level, a very conscious, real level, we have finally reached globalization where we can have the conversation globally,
mm-hmm.
where people can actually chime in and we can actually know what people are thinking. Because I think the tribal conversation versus community conversation has been going on for millennia. The difference is it was very segmented and very isolated conversations, and they agree, no, we're much stronger as a community than as a tribe. We need to thrive. We need to grow. We need to manage this growth process. We need to have these conversations. I'm sorry, who are you? In comes someone riding a horse or sailing a boat. Sorry, we want what you have. What do you mean you want what you have? No. Or maybe in the case of, Europeans coming to the Americas, it's like, yeah, sure, come on in. Wait, you want to do what?
Yeah. Yeah. Have a seat. Make yourselves at home. Wait, not like that.
And that's the problem is our community is not your community is the typical conversation. And we're okay thriving, and, but we're not okay bringing you into that because we don't know what you're going to do to us. Because the Romans and the Greeks, and I think this was found out earlier than that, but the Romans and the Greeks were the perfect example of what happens when you assimilate a culture. So the Romans conquered the Greek. Unlike any other conquering in modern history, the Greeks became the teachers, the tutors, the servants, the elders, the wisdom keepers for the Roman Empire. And they just changed names, and the Greek Empire became the Roman Empire. And you assimilate it. And, the same thing with Christians. Christians, from a religious standpoint, assimilated the quote unquote pagan or the natural, which is why we have Easter about fertility.
Sure.
Not, rising of Christ, fertility, eggs, bunny. Yeah. Okay. So like
throw in a bunny. We're good.
Right. So we know from experience that if we assimilate, then it's going to drastically impact our way of life. And so there's a fear. We don't want our way of life to change. We don't want to assimilate you. We need to remove you, but we still want what you have. So we either have to keep the trading at a distance so that you can't affect us and we can't affect you, which we also know from history that doesn't work out, because sooner or later someone wants to sleep with someone from the other side. Sooner or later there's going to be assimilation going on. And every time a war is broken out, it's basically like, we don't want to assimilate. We don't want your culture and our culture. We want to keep separate cultures. And either it's like, okay, how can we thrive together? And there's a mixing of culture anyways. Or how do we stay separate? Which sooner or later you got some greedy bastard that's going to, we're just going to take it. And we're left with Ukraine.
Well, I think it is really interesting to look at how, because I think both can be important. The individual identity or even communal identity, right? I mean, it's more distinct with tribalism, right? It's like, okay, well, by definition, there's now an, other that is not us. But I think the same can be true of community. And even just biologically, we're only designed to be able to, nurture, I forget, they did this study, however, 125 or 225, like individuals, sort of like the maximum number of people you can have in your sphere in like a particularly meaningful way, and different, all those other pieces. So like the benefit of individual or, smaller group collective identities in what now is very much a world that is so beyond interconnected that a barge halfway across the world getting stuck in a canal affects whether or not I can get toilet paper at the store. Like that's a pretty, holy cow. And I think we're seeing it now in a way, because it's tangible in a way that it hasn't. That like, I saw this thing on the news about this thing that's happened in a place I'm unlikely to ever go visit, just because it's halfway across the world. And it literally is changing whether or not I can wipe my butt. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah. The interconnectedness is inextricable at this point. And I think it happened in the 50s, really, because after World War II, globalization was a foregone conclusion. And America exported their culture of consumerism. Old Victor LeBeau sat down with Truman and said, well, if we want to keep the American economy thriving, we need to make consumerism the new religion of America. So Victor LeBeau did that, and it basically set off in motion capitalism and consumerism, and exported American culture everywhere, for better, for worse. That's a whole nother conversation. Actually, let's move, because that's a huge other conversation for another time.
I know.
So let's take that opportunity and switch gears for a second. How have you dealt with all of these moving pieces and intermittent consciousness of coming in and getting comfortable, waking back up and saying, no, I don't want to be comfortable right now? How do you deal with all of that? Like, what are is it just the acting? Do you meditate? Do you have other artistic passions, music, or other coping mechanisms that allowed you to handle changing your life at 16, moving out of your mom's, or dealing with acting as like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this, or at least not the way I've been doing it? Like, how do you deal with all of that?
I mean, some days better than others. I would say I'm a big believer in the small decisions that happen over time. And I'm a huge believer and have seen in my own experience what I would call systems in place in my life that support navigating these things generally in a healthy way. Because I think it's happened over time. Like there's specific, like I've journaled effectively every single day, 99.9% of days for the last 10 or 11 years.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Like that's a practice for me that is just, going to the gym is not that yet for me. I've never been the person like, yep, no matter what, it always happens. I've been, but I do take care of my physical body. But again, a lot of it's like the habits. Like I eat healthy and I just continue to eat healthier and healthier by small tweaks. Like,
so do you see that as a habit or do you see that as a choice?
Well, it's a choice that turned into a habit.
Okay.
Because I continue to choose over time, but it's like, for me, it's been small things. Like I'm fortunate that I grew up eating relatively healthy. My parents had pretty good, especially given what they knew at the time. Like we got pretty good training around healthy eating and like body autonomy. Like you can stop eating when you're full. My parents didn't make me, finish everything on your plate. It's like, okay, if you're full, your body's full, stop eating. We get to have a conversation if you took all the rest of the meatloaf and now no one else had it to put on their plate. Like, okay, we get to talk about portions, but then like over time, just continuing as I've learned more and looked to experts and my friends who are like super like personal trainers and health coaches and all that. I'm like, oh my gosh, they know way more than I probably ever will. What am I learning from them? The small changes. I mean, it happened, my girlfriend sent me a TikTok about some of the, sorry, you froze. So I stopped. My girlfriend sent me a TikTok on like the best alternative milks and realizing like, oh, one of these things that I'm putting in my shake every day has whatever sunflower oil or something that's like probably not that good. And so then I changed that, but then I changed my Amazon subscription for it. And now I don't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
Like I don't have to keep actively making that choice because it just happens. So I do think yes, it's very much a choice, but it can become totally unconscious in a way that is helpful.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, do you define a habit as something that's unconscious?
Not necessarily. I'm trying to remember how he defined it in Power of Habit, which I thought was really relatively helpful. I mean, what's the model? You probably know this, but from like unconscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious competence, like that model, if you know what I'm talking about. But like,
it's been a minute, so I don't remember how. Yeah,
it's like you sort of move through the stages. But I think the point being that once something becomes a habit, I guess the simple way I would define it is like the default setting. My default setting is that I eat healthy, and everything in my life based on, again, like I think about the system. I order my groceries on Instacart because it saves me time, and it's very convenient, and every time I order, I have like pretty much the same things that I order every time. And so it's like, it just happens. Like it's a system. The default setting is this healthy thing will end up in my fridge.
Making batch decisions or managing decisions in batch orders, I think is incredibly effective and simplifies, your life. So like by just, creating, okay, I'm just going to handle all my shopping this way so that I don't have to think about it, is great. The only problem with that, just for the sake of conversation, is like your girlfriend pointed out that there's an ingredient in something that you thought was quote unquote healthy. So if you're always batched and you're never checking in, so do you have a check-in as part of your system to look for
it's
errors?
A great point. Yeah, because if you're not iterating on that, you can get caught in the same thing, or something that used to work doesn't work anymore. Yeah. If you do the exact same workout every day, you'll stop building muscle, right? Because you're not changing any part of it.
The perfect example is in the 1950s, eating organically was just called eating.
Yeah. It's just called food.
Right. It's called food. That's not the case anymore, because the
Mhm.
50s changed everything. Because all the chemicals that were developed during World War II had to go somewhere. And so
Mhm.
we just started using them for all kinds of things, whether we needed them or not. And then all of a sudden we lost organic food, or we lost food.
Yeah.
And now we have stuff, we have processed. But that's the thing, is because there was no system in place, because no one thought about it, to say, is innovation good or bad in this area?
Sure.
And I'm a firm believer in be the change you want to see.
Mhm.
And you know we need to have more of these conversations so that other people can feel comfortable having these conversations. And I know you're comfortable having these conversations, so we're having this conversation. And hopefully people see it and say, oh, what am I eating, what am I putting in my body, and what systems do I have in place? I always get the whole fat milk. Is that a good idea? I don't know. What are you trying to achieve in your life? And
Sure.
maybe it's the perfect source of healthy fat, or maybe it's way too much fat and you need to
Sure.
cut back. But making those choices consciously, and checking in on them, is so important. And um, just to kind of stick with the coping mechanisms, so it sounds like systems are an enormous part of your coping mechanism to simplify your life, to streamline. Journaling is something you do for your inner work.
Mhm.
So from a whole holistic standpoint of your whole life, interconnected life, it sounds like you use systems for kind of the checks and balances of the day-to-day living, and you use journaling for the day-to-day internal work, shadow work,
Yep.
psychological check-ins. Any other systems or techniques or devices?
For me, a couple of the big ones are yoga. Yoga is a really powerful practice for me,
So
that
is
hits
that a,
on
a really regular
physical.
thing?
Yes. It was easier during this is interesting. Or I think it's interesting. It was, I was
Someone else will find it
so,
interesting.
yeah, exactly. I was so regular about it because it was such a system in my life before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And my exercise routine was so just built into my life that I
Yeah.
didn't have to think about it. When the pandemic happened, holy crap, it's now taking a lot of willpower because all my systems are gone. The way my life is structured
Yeah.
is totally different. And like, I'm just now getting back to, what closer to, I think, where I was before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But so, yes, it's been regular. And thankfully, my favorite yoga teacher, shout out Dalton, the Light Orchard,
Nice.
moved his classes online. So I was able
Oh.
to start doing those. So I've been doing that a lot. Actually got to do an in-person class last week. But so yoga has definitely been a big piece, and hot yoga for me, particularly pre-pandemic when I was in the studio, because for me, it touched mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, like all of that for me, because my body was so taxed that it is often the most present I ever am, especially when I'm in a studio. Like, my phone is in a locker. I'm not near any distractions. I'm cut off from the world, in a manner of speaking, right? In another manner of speaking, I'm as connected to the world as I ever am. And my body is being physically used, and it brings me to the present moment in a way that has been very profound for me. So the hot yoga and yoga practice has been a big piece of it. And the other one I would say is the systems that I have as it relates to like my community and the relationships in my life. Like, my sister is the person I'm probably closest to in my whole life. And at least in many, many ways. And we check in regularly and have long conversations regularly. And because of who she is and who I am and the relationship we've built, there's a pretty automatic check-in. Like, if there's something going on in my relationship, she's going to ask about it. And she'll ask me, even if she doesn't know it, like, she's going to check in with me about how that's going. And so I'm going to have that check-in because if nothing else, Nikki's going to ask me about it. Like, hey, so how's this going? What's going on with your relationship? And I do the same thing with her. My dad, I have a lot of that. Other friends in my life. I happen to be friends with a lot of like coaches and powerful, like people who will also like share the context of calling me on my shit or as you know, the community I have is like a built-in, if something's going wrong, somebody's going to notice and say something.
Yeah.
I don't know that everybody has that. I'm very grateful that I have that and the relationships. Cause like, if there's something going awry or I seem off, there's my girlfriend, my family are all pretty immediate, going to reflect it back to me. And then a whole other community of people just beyond that who are going to have me check in. And I also have built in my one of my other best friends, Robin. He and I have been doing an annual review every year for, I think this was our 12th or 13th year.
Oh, wow.
We used to do it when we're both from Colorado. He was my roommate when I moved to LA. And the first year we moved to LA in February, going back for the holidays, like, hey, let's road trip. And on that road trip, we started our first ever annual review. Let's look back at the year, what worked, what didn't, look at the different areas of our life. And then we continued and we've iterated on that trend. And to your point, like we have a very specific structure for it, but like it's also changed over the years. This last year, like, hey, some of these things that we've done for 6 of the last years, like aren't serving us the same way. So let's shift it up. But like, there's a very, very intentional, I mean, we spend 40 to 80 hours doing like a very thorough review of our year and coaching each other and all of that.
That's amazing. That's a lot of time. I mean, one of the things I want to highlight, because you said, I don't know if other people have this. I just want to highlight anyone can have all of that support and that network. They may have to cultivate it themselves if they don't already have it in place. But if they want it, they can have it. And this is one of the things that I feel like people don't always know, that they can have something. This is free to anybody who wants it. Just start talking to the people around you. If they're resistant, talk longer. Talk less, talk longer, or like not longer in one sitting, but over a longer period of time, but say less over a longer period of time. If people are receptive to it, talk longer in a shorter period of time until you develop it. Oh, I lost you. I lost your sound.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
I completely resonate with that. And I also do think it's a skill that can be practiced because I look at, again, to keep coming back to this, when I moved out of my mom's house, so I was living on a ranch. We're in the middle of nowhere. I was a cowboy, not really by choice, but by like, that's so what we do in this house.
Like, what?
Yeah, I was a bull rider. I was a team roper. I'm a champion sheep and dairy cow showman. Like my whole life was living on a ranch. It's so random, right? My stepdad was a cowboy. He grew up as a cowboy. And like when my mom left, when my parents split, she ended up with him, the stepdad, and we lived on a ranch, and like that became my life. So I went from suburban end of a cul-de-sac, suburban kid to country kid, total fish out of water. But for all the flaws my stepdad had as a human, and they were many, he was a very, very good horse trainer, horseback rider, rodeo, like gifted with animals.
Wow, that's amazing.
Not so gifted with people. And a legitimate abusive level of work ethic. Those things combined took us completely suburban kids into the country, and we became like, we won the rodeos, and we were like some of the best in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then moving back in with my dad, I had, in a way, like, so when I started high school, I knew nobody, not a single person. I didn't know any humans at the high school. And I was blessed with the experiences that I'd had, the experience I'd had homeschooling that gave me a mindset around, and like making this decision. I'm like, I left the life and it created a lot of chaos. Interestingly, I was to reduce the chaos. Like there was so much chaos there. That's partly why I left. but I wanted to be there. Like I chose this specific high school. I chose now. I completely changed my life to be here. So I was very excited to be there. I wanted to be there. I wanted to learn. I was hungry for knowledge, and that approach served me very well, but was not the norm. Like kind of got made fun of a little bit here and there. Although my high school like was blessed because the high school specifically, like we were the nerdy high school and it was like a badge of honor. Our football team hadn't won a game. They still are tied for the state record for most losses in a row.
Oh, wow.
Like won it with 4 years in a row. And then they tied the game that would have given them the record. Like we weren't even the best at losing. And
that's awesome.
And like the speech and debate team was like exalted. And we had this amazing choir program and like all these things. And so there weren't really any cliques. There was very little tribalism in the high school. And we had the IB program at the school. So like high achieving students were celebrated along with everybody else. I wouldn't say that they were on a pedestal. It was like, and a lot of this comes down to leadership. Our principal, Dr. Westerberg at the time, treated every kid exactly the same.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Whether you were the best student or you were the kid ditching class to go smoke weed over on the north side during your class, he treated you with respect. So all of this to say, the environment was ripe. My mindset was there, and I got to practice building community. And over time, I mean, I'm still Robin, who I mentioned in the annual review. He was the first kid I met at high school because we both transferred in at the beginning of our sophomore year. He was the first kid I met, and I was texting him earlier today. He's currently building things for my business.
Nice.
Like I'm all of that. And to your point that anybody can have this, it would be easy to view it as this like magical thing that happens to us or not. But to your point, which I think is so true, which is like, you can practice it. Hey, here's a tangible thing. People are resistant. Great. Maybe talk less and spread it out over more time. Like there are tangible, practical ways that we can practice cultivating community. And I think it's really hard. I notice it, especially for anybody who goes to college, but especially in that general age, the structure of school builds community in. There are at least structures that are pretty built in, whether they're healthy or not, but like it's pretty built in. You're going to have friends. You're going to see people. If you're in high school or college, like you're going to be around other people your age that have similar interests in some way, shape, or form in the same place at the same time with a shared experience. And then you leave that, and now it requires a lot more effort to cultivate that. And what I love that you're saying is it is possible, though it may require some effort.
Yeah. And I mean, the closer the people are to you, the easier it's going to be. However, then you also have the baggage of the fact that they're closer with you and they're probably pretty set in their way.
Sure.
So, there's a pro and a con to working with the people closest to you. And because there's an emotional attachment, the closer they are, the higher the emotional stakes. However, if you go and remove yourself and put yourself in a brand new community, you have higher personal emotional stakes for survival because you're in unknown territory, and it really requires a great deal of managing fear and managing your own triggers and reactions. So that you can come from a neutral place, if not a place of love. There's a therapist that I met with years ago. I was going through some family stuff, and he asked, do you hate, like, or love yourself? Do you hate, like, or love your mom, your dad, and it would always be hate, like, love, or love, like, hate, whichever. And like, for him, he defined like as a very neutral. You don't love, you don't hate, you like them. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. They're in your life. And hate, obviously, much more dramatic, and love, much more dramatic on the other spectrum. And I found that to be a really powerful, simple indicator. Do hate, like, or love writing in your journal. You know what I mean? And obviously you love writing in your journal because it's something you've been doing for 12 years. And, it's a good, simple kind of muscle test, if you will, for gauging anything.
Well, it's a good way to check in, right? Your point earlier about like checking in, because I've done it with journaling too, because there have been times where it's like, I'm just doing it because I'm going through the motions because I've done it, or I'm doing it. And I certainly have found some value in like doing it even when I don't want to, or even if like, I'm not sure if it's serving me or not, like that, having that one thing in my life that has been such a consistent practice.
But you also have to be able to check in and ask, am I getting it? Do I hate, like, or love this? And if I hate it right now, is it because it's shining a light on me in an uncomfortable way?
Yeah.
And so, like, there has to be, it can't just be, do you hate this or do you love this or like this? If nothing else goes along with it, then the metric is kind of useless.
Sure.
You're measuring
what's underneath that. Where's that coming from? But it's a great way to kind of start that conversation. Like, where am I activated around this? Am I not?
And what's interesting is, like, you have clearly very conscious routines and practices and coping mechanisms, but it also sounds like you have a bunch of other mechanisms that, if you were to teach a class on your methodology for coping, it sounds like you might have to mine your own work a little bit, because I'm gathering, and I might be totally off base, but I'm gathering that you do a lot more than just what you've illuminated or highlighted for me. But you're so used to doing it because you've been doing it your entire life, and you started doing it at a fairly early age because your parents gave you the agency to make decisions at a very young age. And so you've been cultivating these methods and these systems for the majority of your life.
And iterating on them and checking in with them. And I do think them. Like what I feel like you continue to presence, which I think is really powerful, is the mindfulness, the consciousness, the thoughtfulness around these things is, I think, if I could put it this way, more important than the mechanism, right? Like, journaling for me is a mechanism that has been really supportive. I don't meditate very often. For yoga, I would call a sort of meditation for me, but like,
absolutely.
Do I think if I practiced it, and I've had periods where I have, like, I do think it would support me. I know other people for whom they will talk about meditation the way I talk about journaling, or someone else who like pots plants and just is in that like connection to the dirt and nature. So like, I don't know that the mechanism itself, it's easy to get caught up in the mechanism, and that's not the piece that's most important.
And for what it's worth, I would argue that your journaling is meditation. And I would argue that the potting of the plants is meditation, because if you just, again, it's the Socratic method. If you sit down and look at what meditation is, it's sitting in focused concentration or thought on something over and over and over again, for no other purpose than to focus on that one thing over and over and over again. So that could be a mantra, that could be a writing, it could be a plant, it could be, running, it could be damn near anything. And, when I used to teach meditation before I moved to Los Angeles, the primary message that I tried to get across is, you're probably already meditating. You just need to identify what it is that you're doing so that you can practice it. And it will give you more fuel, more power, more value, just acknowledging it for what it is. My mom's thing was ironing.
I love ironing.
She would just go and iron. She would iron boxers. She would iron handkerchiefs. She would iron sheets, whatever it was. She would iron because it gave her respite respite from whatever was going on. And it was a single-minded focus over and over and over again.
Yeah.
What she was ironing would change. How she ironed it perhaps would change with different techniques for different, folds and all that stuff. What's coming out of your mind as a writer is going to change, but the act of writing is the meditation. What's coming out is just, a handkerchief versus a scarf versus a towel versus boxers versus a shirt, or whatever. The terrain may change as you're jogging, but the act of jogging is the meditation.
Yeah.
Everything else is just, noise, white noise.
Yeah.
Last thing, let's wrap this up for now. Moving forward in life, we've talked about some, kind of changes coming forward.
Yeah.
You're in a relationship where you're talking about kids. Do you see all of the things you've put in place thus far? Do you just, now that you have these things, is it just a matter of like, oh my God, gratitude, thank God I have these things to move forward and look at kids and these new challenges? Are there new things you want to put in place or try? Like moving forward in your life, we've explored all, these different aspects of your past and present, and these tools and mechanisms and being aware. Like, how does that play out moving forward now?
I guess we'll see. I am very much looking forward to continuing the process of partnership and parenthood. And I think part of it is that I have a sense that both of those things will stir up all the stuff, right? Like the systems I have right now that work great in my life, when there's a 2-year-old running around, like some of those systems are probably not going to work that well.
Yeah.
Will they have supported me? Will there be elements of it? Sure. And I'll find new, pieces to that. But I do think there's an evolution for me in that I'm looking very much forward to.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see if you just go deeper in the systems instead of change the systems.
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly coming back and reminding myself to be mindful and check in. Like,
yeah.
Cause that is just how my brain works. I'm a systematic thinker. So I'm sure there will be elements of that are there. And for me, I find there's a freedom. It's like, I'm very spontaneous when I've created time to be spontaneous. But there is something about when for the way my composition is when there are certain things in place, I feel safer and have a level of freedom and can take risks and do other pieces that because there's a foundation there that is solid for me.
Yeah. But it's easy to be spontaneous when you're not scared or in fear.
Yeah. Yeah. So like taking care of those things so that I'm not in survival mode, whether that's around whatever, money or health or living situation or any of those things, it is then easier to do that. But so, yeah, I think that the biggest piece is that partnership and parenthood journey, and where that integrates with the vision for the world that I have and the social change that is important to me through art and storytelling, through business, through, the SAG-AFTRA, through the union, through community, very much that community. That intersection and the same, I'm looking at it in a different way because there's a parallel to me to the story that I used to have of, a relationship will be a hindrance to business success. It's like, because I went through that, I don't have quite the same, a family and these other things will be a hindrance to the social change and the other pieces.
Changing that story is huge. I mean, I just think that's at the core of how you get where you're at. Because if you maintain that story of partnership is a hindrance, you would never have a healthy relationship.
Yep. Yep, that is correct. Yeah, shifting that story's been a life changer.
We can always do a round two. Any last thoughts before I stop recording?
I'm feeling very grateful, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness. And I have always known you to be a very deep thinker. And what I have seen even in your evolution, and what I love about this format is finding a way to, yes, do some very deep thinking, but also looking at like, how does that apply and how does that impact?
I want the utility.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with an intellectual exercise for the sake of an intellectual exercise. And what other richness is available in looking at like, oh yeah, well, like, what does that mean for how I'm going to experience my partnership tonight? How am I going to show up for my career? How am I going to make this decision? And like that intersection has been really fun to explore. And I appreciate you creating the space to make that happen.
Yeah, no, thank you. I started laughing because it's just always so funny. Anytime anyone says, "Oh, you're such a deep thinker," it's like, am I though? Is it that deep? I don't know. Like,
a thinker, deep or not, a thinker for sure.
It's, when you're in the forest, it's hard to define the forest.
See the forest of the trees. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always just kind of amusing to hear how deep my forest goes. It's like, like, I don't know, it looks the same to me, but okay. That's one of the things I love about acting, though, is acting is all about exploring possibilities. And then when the curtain comes up or someone yells action, you just say, well, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So, and to a great extent, that's, I think, what this is. And, being a fellow actor, I feel like it's very easy to just throw caution to the wind and say, okay, let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Yeah. So, it's one of the great gifts. Well, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Stick with me for just a half a second.
Yeah, of course.
Don't forget to leave a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. New episodes every Tuesday, and check us out on YouTube for short clips from each episode. Thank you. And until next time, remember, your life story is yours to write and rewrite as many times as you want.